Hello and welcome back to another video, the fifth and final part for the 50 states. Today we will do states number 41 through 50. But before we get into that, I would just like to let you know about a couple videos I plan on shooting, and maybe in the comments you can let me know, is that a good idea or is that a bad idea? But Skiff comments a lot on my videos. Thank you so much, Skiff. Let me know what's going well, what's not going well sometimes. Always usually very supportive though. He asked a question, why do we have "in God we trust" on a lot of our money? And that was a good question. I didn't quite know. I know at the beginning of our country's kind of birth, when we had the so-called founding fathers, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, some of those guys, the United States was a little bit more religious. And when we say the Pledge of Allegiance every day, it does end with something about God. I know it. I may do a video on the Pledge of Allegiance, but under God. I think it says under God in it. I mean, I say it every day. I should know it. But he had wondered why we have that on our money, and it made me think, oh, I don't know, but maybe that would make for a good video, like US currency, talking about the $1 bill, the $2 bill, the quarter, the dime. So if that is something you would like to know, and a little history on our money, there's a lot of American history on the bills. So if that's something you would like to see, let me know. I'm also thinking about doing another starter pack with the days of the week and the months of the year. And when I did the last one about numbers, number 7, I quickly went through the days of the week, but I was thinking maybe go into each day in a little bit more detail about what Americans typically do on Saturday or Sunday, some of our pastimes, some of our hobbies. I'd also like to talk about, I'll put up here the list of countries who are tuning in, and just thank you guys once again for all your support. As you can see, Italy is right there at the top. Russia is up there, France, Brazil, the US, probably most of my family that's watching from the US. Actually, I haven't told any of my friends where to find me on this channel, just because they all know English. So I don't know who's watching from the US, but the podcast also, I think the country that listens the most is the US. So Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Germany, Hungary, Vietnam, Egypt, Morocco. Thank you guys for tuning in. But you can see 70% are from other countries. So if you would please, in the comments, where are you listening from? Where's the other 70%? I know I've talked to people in Japan who are listening, but if you would be so kind and just drop me a note, tell me which country you're listening from, I'd greatly appreciate it. The last 10 states. What you will notice about these states is that they are all out west, and most of them are really pretty big compared to the states in the east. And if you've been following this series, you know the first series, part 1, all of those 13 states were on the East Coast, and they're smaller. I think as we expanded west as a country, I think people just got sick of making states. They're like, let's just put this huge one here, this huge one. Number 41 is a massive state. It's the 4th biggest. Number 41 is Montana. And a lot of these states are sparsely populated. And what I mean by sparsely populated is that there are not a lot of people living in each square mile or each square kilometer. If you look back to the first video, I talked about New Jersey being the most densely populated state. Densely populated is the opposite of sparsely populated. And only 6 people per square mile live in Montana. Yet Montana is our 4th largest state. So not a lot of people living in Montana considering its size. The origin of Montana actually comes from Spanish, meaning mountain. So the Spanish did settle in Montana and were eventually pushed out, but just like so many other people who had settled in Montana, but the name originated from Spanish. And it's also known as Big Sky Country, meaning the sky is huge there because you won't see a lot of skyscrapers, in fact, hardly any. It's not a lot of people living there, as we said. And it's the only state that borders 3 Canadian provinces. So Canada, of course, is our neighbor to the north, and they don't do states in Canada. They do provinces. And Montana borders these 3 provinces: British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, which is a mouthful to say, Saskatchewan. State number 42 is Washington, named after our first president. You may have heard of a little coffee company called Starbucks. Well, Starbucks headquarters are in Washington. Washington also produces more apples than any other state. And there are 2 big colleges in Washington state. There's one called the University of Washington and another one called Washington State University. And at the end of the year, they play a big football game. You may have heard of the Super Bowl. Well, these 2 teams get together and play in something called the Apple Cup. Number 43 is Idaho. Idaho, I promise, that is a real name. Idaho. Not as weird as number 45, probably Utah. We'll get to them in a minute. But Idaho, it is full of what is called ghost towns. Ghost towns. So I would say mostly back in the 1800s, people moved to Idaho to mine for gold and silver and copper. And when a lot of people would move to one place, a town of some sort would pop up. So you would have, of course, housing, you might have a hotel, you would definitely have a bar, some sort of store. And then once the gold or silver or copper ran out, people would move on. And a ghost town is what's left. So the buildings still stand, but there are no people around. So Idaho is known for having a lot of ghost towns. Number 44 is Wyoming. Massive state, big state. About 500,000 people live in Wyoming. Not a lot of people. And in fact, Wyoming has so few people, so few cities, that the entire state only has 2 escalators. And if you're not sure of what escalator is in English, I'll write it above and I'll put a couple pictures. Escalators, basically stairs that move. Number 45, Utah. Utah. Kind of strange name there, Utah. But Utah is famous for being the place where the TransContinental Railroad connected. TransContinental. Big word. Trans, meaning across. Trans, across. Continental comes from continent. So at one time in this country, it was very difficult to get from east to west. So a transcontinental railroad was built, and the final spike, known as the Golden Spike, was placed in Utah. And so now there is a historical marker where that final spike was placed in the railroad track to connect east, west, making it much easier to get across the country. And the TransContinental Railroad was finished on May 10th, 1869. State number 46 is Oklahoma. And Oklahoma is very famous for a bad reason. They have more tornadoes every year than any other state. And in fact, in 2019, they had 146 tornadoes. The state is so famous for having tornadoes, it has the nickname Tornado Alley. Number 47 is New Mexico. Also famous probably for a bad reason. The first atomic bomb was detonated in New Mexico at a place called Los Alamos, and that happened, got the date right there, July 16th, 1945. Number 48 is Arizona. You may have heard of the city called Phoenix, big city in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona. And the last two states might have been known for bad reasons, but Arizona is known for being home to the Grand Canyon. Maybe a site that you've heard of. Pretty famous around the world, I think. Number 49 is Alaska. I have a lot of facts about Alaska. It's our largest state. It is known for producing oil. In fact, 25% of America's oil is produced in Alaska. In 1880, there was a gold rush there. So much like when I talked about the gold rush in California, in 1880, people flocked to Alaska to try to get rich on gold. But before Alaska became a state, it was a territory in the United States, and before that, it was actually part of Russia. Now, the U.S. purchased Alaska during Abraham Lincoln's time. So he was president, and his Secretary of State was a man by the last name of Seward. And he purchased Alaska from Russia for 2 cents an acre. It turned out to be $7,200,000. Now, of course, back in the middle of the 1800s, that was a lot of money. And Alaska at one time was known as Seward's Folly, or Seward's mistake, because he basically purchased a big white land full of nothingness. Snow, lots of snow, maybe some polar bears. So it wasn't until later, when people started discovering gold and oil, that Alaska turned out to be a really good deal for the United States. State 50. We've made it to the end. Before I get to Hawaii, I just want to remind you, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Leave a comment if you like this video. Also, thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching. Hawaii, the only state to actually grow coffee. The world's pineapples, 1/3 of them come from Hawaii. And also, Hawaii is the most isolated population on Earth. And what I mean by most isolated population is that they are basically in the middle of nothing else but water. Listen to these statistics. They are 2,390 miles away from California, which is the closest large landmass. From Japan, they are 3,850 miles. From the Philippines, they are 5,280 miles. So, long story short, if you are going to go to Hawaii, plan on it taking a lot of time for your flight and a lot of money. Getting to Hawaii from anywhere isn't cheap. So, thank you once again. If you've watched all 5 parts of these state videos, you know quite a bit about the United States. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.